the situation in the United States that we have for critical infrastructure is one where it's extremely fragile, it's extremely complicated, and extremely expensive. Those things pile into a situation where small things build up to create collapse. And so one of the challenges we have is that a lot of the systems we have are controlled by software systems. These software systems control our power grid, our water supply, our transportation network, our gas pipeline network. And because we are a big country and we have all these systems distributed all over the place, they are interconnected via largely network connections like the internet. So what does that mean? As we integrate more and more complicated computing systems into our lives, we create a larger and larger attack surface. What this means is that over time, we become more dependent on these systems. I mean, who in here would live without their iPhone or their Android phone or things like that? But the next thing is, it also means that it creates these points where somebody can go in and attack the network or take it down. So how many people in here have lived through a blackout or a loss of power failure? By raise your hands. Okay. How many people in here have seen that last for more than a day? Okay. How about a week? So you get to understand how unpleasant it is to live without power in that time period. Well, in 2003, there was a blackout in the Northeast in August. And the root cause of it was a software bug. And the software bug was on the systems of First Energy. Now, what really happened was a tree fell on a power line. And when that happened, it caused a change in the power profile, and it set off a bunch of alarms at their control center. The trouble was, of course, that, well, they didn't see it because the software had failed. And as a result, Northeast was without power for several days. What did this mean? First off, downtown Manhattan, they had to bring in 40,000 police officers on duty to direct traffic because the traffic lights went out. They had to shut down the metro system because the trains weren't running because they're running, electricity. The E911 system failed. So everyone was like, well, what the hell's going on? We have to fix this problem. So that was just a glimpse of how a large-scale failure would happen. The aftermath of that event, we had things like sewage systems that were flooding into drinking water supply environments, or we had refrigeration systems failing. We had gas pipeline systems failing. And another thing relating to Zach's talk earlier, we're heavily dependent on nuclear power to supply power. The problem is you can't start a nuclear power plant without a power supply. So when the power supply failed, they had to shut down all the reactors, and they had to draw power from other parts of the country in order to restart it. Now, the scale of that failure was huge. It resulted in Congress and the federal government creating a new reliability corporation that was supposed to manage the bulk power system. So let's draw this back to what happened. So a couple months ago, the Energy Regulatory Commission looked at a terrorist attack on a series of substations in California. And it was coordinated, and it was just a sniper shooting. Some people are taking pot shots at a transmission system. And it caused a serious degradation of the power supply. That was one isolated incident. The criticality of these particular substations is such that if we lose more than a handful of them, the entire national power grid will fail. The consequence of that is we can't restart it. And that means months will go by without power. Now, last month, Congress had a commission look at the impact of grid failure. And the thing that they found was 90% of the American population will perish if there is a nationwide blackout. No joke. So, we're not playing games here. These are really important things we have to talk about. But, how do we deal with this problem? Right now, we've seen that we've had cyber attacks on most of our critical infrastructure. Right now, thankfully, none of that has really translated to a larger issue. But since all these systems are all run on network routable connections, we're at risk. The only things that we use right now to protect those systems are firewalls, like those little devices that you have at home, or if you have a server network, much bigger. But long story short is, they no longer work to defend against the attacks that we're now seeing. And the result of that is that we're at risk to having an outsider have a very easy way to take down large portions of our infrastructure. Now, the DoD did an assessment of what that means to us. They said it's an existential threat, resulting in catastrophic loss of life, the failure of the US government, it will fall, and the fact that the only response that they've defined so far, #1 recommendation, is to maintain our strategic nuclear capacity. And that's kind of a chilling thought. You know, if a terrorist attack, you know, goes against the United States, what is our response? Start lobbing bombs everywhere. So that's kind of a really worrying challenge. Everyone's talking about global warming and how this can impact things in the next 50 years, but the likelihood or possibility and the specter of having a nuclear attack or having a critical cyber incident that results in grid failure is even a more sobering and realistic problem. So what can we do about it? The challenge is there are not enough people in the world right now skilled in cybersecurity or information assurance. A lot of them go to work for federal agencies or defense contractors or telecommunications providers, but there's not enough people to the point where there's now a 1 in 20 hiring shortage in the energy sector for IT jobs related to system security. That's a crisis. We need more people to work on these problems. But we have to also do it very quickly. So the other part of this talk is that we have to build the Manhattan Project of our age. And the way that would be functioning is the federal government has to work with the private sector. Right now, it's an adversarial relationship. That creates challenges. The challenge with that is that most of these companies like NV Energy or Duke Energy or things like that have an incentive not to upgrade their systems or expose their vulnerabilities because they're liable for it. So we have to change that dynamic. We have to create new standards in cybersecurity. We have to create new tools and technologies that allow us to monitor these systems in real time, new technologies to make our grid more resilient. I mean, we have a very, very fragile transmission network. If any parts of those network fails, we can't undo it. As a matter of fact, there's a backlog of about 2 years for the transformers. If they get damaged during a cyber attack like this, it'll take 2 years to ship them back from China. I'm not kidding. There's that much of an industrial loss in this country that we don't have the supply side capability to undo the damage. So on the notion of having a Manhattan-style project, they took 4 years, starting in 1942, and they spent an incredible amount of money in secret, built an entire urban area and a bunch of national labs, created a whole new infrastructure, and trained thousands of people on a field that, at the time, was voodoo. Nobody understood it. And that's the same situation we have today. We have to find ways of educating people. We have to find ways of putting the money in place to do it and to build these technologies. And if we don't do that, we're faced with economic collapse at best. So, you know, the challenge that we have with the public perception, everyone's saying, well, the deficit's huge, and you know, we have too much money being spent on defense and everything else. We need to have a domestic defense program. Right now, we don't have one. Edward Snowden got caught, by the way, disclosing all the tools that the NSA used to detect and provide attribution of cyber attacks. Now, I'm not such a big fan of his, but because of the fact that heretofore, the NSA could track where the attacks were coming from. Now they can't, because there's no way to positively prove what was going on. And that's why secrecy in this type of project would be paramount. And it has to be coordinated across all of our power supplies, all of our natural gas pipeline operators, all of our water systems. And people say, well, Jesse, it hasn't happened yet, so why is that? It's very simple. No rational nation state would take the steps to take such an action. But, there's other options like, I don't know, Al-Qaeda. Or what about Ted Kaczynski? He was pretty insane, but brilliant. So, these types of threat actors are things where we need to come to a sober realization that we're not doing anything to fix this problem. Ironically, DHS is only authorized under statute to become aware of a risk. They're not able to direct companies to make changes. And so the first step is going to be able to authorize the government to step in and to compel compliance. And that's something that, right now, lobbyists don't really like. And that's it.